Nebraska's 2001 cold case continues to baffle investigators, and the mystery still shocks the Omaha community. On June 13th, 19-year-old Jason Jolkowski put on his work uniform, moved the trash cans from his family's front yard, and walked 8 blocks toward Benson High School to meet a co-worker for a ride. He never made it. In broad daylight on familiar sidewalks, Jason Anthony Jolkowski simply vanished without a trace. No witnesses, no evidence, no clues. His mother, Kelly, refused to let the world forget, founding Project Jason and fighting for missing persons legislation. For over 2 decades, his case has haunted Omaha residents and baffled federal investigators. The gentle, reliable teenager who never missed work or broke promises disappeared in the span of half a mile, leaving behind only questions that echo through time. How does someone vanish completely in the middle of a sunny morning in their own neighborhood? Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The morning of June 13, 2001, began like countless others in the Jolkowski household on North 48th Street. Sunlight streamed through kitchen windows as Kelly poured coffee and watched her 19-year-old son Jason move methodically around their modest Omaha home. He had always been this way, quiet, responsible, never one to rush or leave tasks half-finished. Jason wore his work uniform, the navy polo shirt and khakis that marked him as an employee at Fazoli's Italian restaurant. The fabric was pressed, his appearance neat. He had been scheduled for an evening shift, but his manager had called earlier asking him to come in early. Jason agreed, without complaint, as he always did. Outside, Jason wheeled the family's garbage cans from the curb back to their place beside the house. His movements were careful, deliberate. He positioned each container precisely where it belonged. Kelly watched from the window, noting how he took time to ensure the lids were secure, that nothing looked out of place. The neighborhood around them hummed with familiar morning activity. Cars pulled from driveways as neighbors headed to work. Children's voices carried from backyards where summer vacation had just begun. This was North Omaha, a working-class area where people knew each other, where 19-year-olds could walk to meet friends without their parents worrying. Jason came back inside briefly, checking the time on the kitchen clock. His co-worker had offered to pick him up at Benson High School, about 8 blocks away, an easy walk through streets Jason had traveled hundreds of times. The high school served as a convenient meeting point, its parking lot familiar territory from his own graduation 2 years earlier. "I'll be back tonight," he told his mother, shouldering a light jacket. The June weather was warm but unpredictable. Kelly nodded, already thinking ahead to dinner plans, to the ordinary evening she expected to share with her son. Jason stepped outside into the bright morning light. He walked down the front steps, turned left on North 48th Street, and headed south toward Benson High School. His stride was unhurried but purposeful. He had plenty of time to make the short journey to his meeting point. That was the last time anyone saw Jason Anthony Jolkowski. The parking lot at Benson High School stretched empty under the morning sun, marked only by painted lines and scattered patches of shade from nearby trees. Jason's co-worker sat behind the wheel of his car, engine running, radio playing softly. They had agreed to meet at 11:15 a.m., plenty of time to get to Fazoli's before the lunch rush. At first, the wait seemed normal. Maybe Jason was running a few minutes late, or had stopped to help a neighbor with something. That would be like him, always willing to lend a hand, never wanting to seem rude or hurried. The co-worker checked the dashboard clock. 11:20, then 11:25. By 11:30, concern began to creep in. Jason was never late for work. In the months they had been colleagues, Jason had established himself as completely reliable. He showed up when scheduled, stayed until his shift ended, never called in sick unless absolutely necessary. Being late for a ride, especially when he had requested the favor, was entirely out of character. The coworker drove slowly through the high school parking lot, checking if Jason might be waiting in a different area. The school building sat quiet, empty during summer break, except for maintenance crews and a few summer program activities. No sign of the familiar figure in the Navy work uniform. At 11:35, the coworker made the decision to call. He pulled up to the payphone near the school's main entrance, fed coins into the slot, and dialed the Jolkowski house. The phone rang several times before Kelly answered. "Hi, Mrs. Jolkowski, this is Jason's coworker from Fazoli's. Is Jason there? We were supposed to meet at the school, but he hasn't shown up." Kelly felt the first flutter of worry. "He left about 20 minutes ago to meet you. He should be there by now." They talked for another minute, both trying to explain away the situation. Maybe Jason had gotten confused about the meeting spot. Maybe he had encountered a neighbor and gotten delayed. Maybe he had decided to walk directly to work instead. But even as they spoke, both felt something wrong settling in their stomachs. Jason didn't get confused about plans. He didn't change arrangements without calling. He didn't leave people waiting. The coworker hung up and drove the route he imagined Jason would have taken, scanning sidewalks and side streets. Nothing. He called Fazoli's to see if Jason had somehow made it to work on his own. He hadn't. By noon, the simple question, "Where is Jason?" had become something much more frightening. Kelly Jolkowski stood at her kitchen window, staring down North 48th Street, as if willing her son to appear. The route to Benson High School was straightforward, a path Jason had walked dozens of times, 8 blocks south, past houses where neighbors would be doing yard work or watching children play. Nothing complicated, nothing dangerous. At 12:15, she called Jason's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. His voice, cheerful and professional. "Hi, you've reached Jason. Please leave a message and I'll call you back." She hung up without speaking. By 12:30, Kelly had called everyone she could think of. Jason's few close friends hadn't heard from him. His girlfriend knew nothing about his work schedule change. His father Jim was at work but promised to come home immediately. Kelly walked outside and stood at the spot where she had last seen Jason. The garbage cans sat exactly where he had placed them, lids still secure. The morning was growing hot, and she shaded her eyes as she looked down the street. A few neighbors were outside now, tending gardens, checking mail. Normal Wednesday afternoon activities. She approached Mrs. Henderson, who lived 3 houses down and was often outside. "Have you seen Jason this morning? He was walking to the school around 11. Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "No, honey. I've been in and out all morning but didn't see him. Is everything okay?" Kelly managed to smile. "I'm sure it's fine. Just trying to reach him." But it wasn't fine, and the feeling in her chest was growing heavier. She called Fazoli's again. Jason still hadn't arrived for his shift, and his manager was getting concerned too. Jason had never missed work without calling. At 1 p.m., Kelly made the call she had been dreading. She dialed 911, her hand shaking as she explained the situation to the dispatcher. "My 19-year-old son left the house this morning to meet a coworker, and he never made it there. He's been missing for 2 hours." The dispatcher was kind but routine. Adults were often late, got distracted, changed plans without telling family. Still, she took down the information. Jason. Anthony Jolkowski, age 19, last seen leaving his home at 2648 North 48th Street around 11 a.m., wearing his work uniform. "We'll send an officer over to take a report," the dispatcher said. Kelly hung up and called Jim again. "I've called the police," she said. "Something's wrong. This isn't like Jason." Jim arrived home within 30 minutes, leaving work in the middle of his shift. By then, Kelly had walked Jason's route to the school twice, asking everyone she met if they had seen him. No one had. When the police officer arrived, Kelly and Jim were standing on their front porch, both staring down the street as if Jason might still appear. The officer was professional but measured. He took down details about Jason's appearance, his plans for the day, his usual habits. "Has he ever gone missing before?" the officer asked. "Any history of running away or not coming home?" "Never," Kelly said firmly. "He's never even been late for work. Something has happened to him." The officer made notes, asked for a recent photo, and promised to file the report immediately. He explained that patrol units would begin looking for Jason, checking the route he would have taken. As the officer left, Kelly felt the weight of a new reality settling over her. Her son had walked out their front door that morning and vanished somewhere in the 8 blocks between home and school, in broad daylight, in their own neighborhood, without a trace. By 6 p.m. on June 13th, dozens of people had gathered at the Jolkowski home. Word had spread through their church, their neighborhood, Jim's workplace. Friends arrived with coffee and sandwiches that no one wanted to eat. Everyone had the same question. Any word yet? The police had expanded their search beyond Jason's intended route. Officers knocked on doors, asking residents if they had seen anything unusual that morning. They checked alleys, vacant lots, and construction sites. They contacted hospitals within a 50-mile radius. Nothing. Detective Ryan Morrison had been assigned to coordinate the search. He was experienced with missing persons cases. But something about this one felt different from the start. Most missing teens had obvious explanations: family conflicts, romantic problems, substance abuse, or simply youthful impulsiveness. Jason fit none of these patterns. "Tell me about Jason," Morrison asked Kelly and Jim as they sat at their kitchen table. "His mood lately? Any problems at home or work? Any conflicts with friends?" Kelly spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. "Jason is quiet. He's always been that way. But he's responsible. He helps around the house without being asked. He's never missed work. He's never stayed out without calling." Jim nodded. "He's a good kid. No drinking, no drugs. He was saving money from his job to help pay for college classes. He talks about wanting to study radio broadcasting." Morrison made notes. "Girlfriend? Any relationship problems?" "He's been seeing a girl from work, but nothing serious. No arguments or drama that we know about." The detective continued his questions. But the picture that emerged was of a young man with no apparent reason to disappear voluntarily. No debt, no legal troubles, no secret life that his parents might not know about. As evening approached, volunteer searchers began arriving. Neighbors who had known Jason since childhood joined with strangers who had heard about the situation. They organized into groups, each taking a different section of the surrounding neighborhood. Kelly watched the volunteers spread out from her front yard, carrying flashlights and calling Jason's name. The sight was both comforting and terrifying. This was what happened when someone truly disappeared, when the normal explanations had been exhausted and the community rallied to help. The searchers moved methodically through streets, alleys, and parks. They looked behind buildings, in dumpsters, under bridges. They knocked on doors that police had already visited, hoping a detail might have been missed. They checked abandoned buildings and construction sites. Hour after hour, the reports came back the same. Nothing. By 10 p.m., the organized search was called off for the night. The volunteers promised to return in the morning, but Kelly could see the concern in their faces. A healthy 19-year-old doesn't vanish without a trace in the middle of a sunny day. Morrison approached Kelly and Jim as the last searchers were leaving. "We've covered a lot of ground today," he said. "Tomorrow we'll expand the search area and bring in tracking dogs. We'll also check Jason's bank and phone records, see if there's any activity we've missed." Kelly looked at the detective, trying to read his expression in the porch light. "What do you think happened to him?" Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Jolkowski, in my experience, when someone disappears this completely, this quickly, it usually means someone took them. The question is who and why." That night, Kelly lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere out there, Jason was either in serious trouble, or she couldn't finish the thought. Every few minutes, she found herself listening for the sound of the front door opening, for Jason's quiet voice calling out that he was home. But the house remained silent except for the sound of her own ragged breathing and Jim's restless turning beside her. Dawn brought no relief, only more questions. Kelly had barely slept, and she was dressed and making coffee before sunrise. The phone had rung several times during the night, friends checking for updates, volunteers offering to help search, reporters who had gotten word of the story. By 7 a.m., Detective Morrison was back at the house, this time with a tracking dog and its handler. The German Shepherd was trained to follow scent trails, and Morrison hoped it might provide some clue about which direction Jason had gone after leaving home. The dog handler, Officer Linda, Reeves explained the process to Kelly and Jim. We'll start where Jason was last seen and let Duke follow his scent. Sometimes people deviate from their planned route, or something catches their attention. The dog might pick up on something we've missed. Kelly led them to the spot on the front walkway where she had last seen Jason. Duke sniffed Jason's pillow, which Kelly had brought outside to give the dog his scent. Then they began walking. The dog followed the expected route at first, heading south on North 48th Street toward Cumming Street. Duke moved confidently, nose to the ground, tail alert. The handler, Morrison, and Kelly followed several feet behind. But after 4 blocks, something changed. Duke began circling, whining softly. He returned to the same spot on the sidewalk repeatedly, then sat down and looked up at his handler. "What does that mean?" Kelly asked, her voice tight. Reeves frowned. "It usually means the scent trail ends here. Either Jason got into a vehicle at this point, or she didn't finish the sentence." They tried starting the search from different points, but the result was the same. Jason's scent trail simply disappeared in the middle of a residential block, still 3 blocks from his intended destination at Benson High School. Morrison examined the area carefully. It was a typical neighborhood street, lined with modest homes and mature trees. Several houses had large front yards with good sight lines. If something had happened to Jason here, in broad daylight, someone should have seen it. They knocked on every door along the block. Most residents had been home that morning, but none remembered seeing Jason or anything unusual. No unfamiliar vehicles parked on the street. No commotion or sounds of distress. Mrs. Garcia, who lived in the house nearest to where the scent trail ended, was particularly frustrated. "I was doing laundry in my front room all morning," she said. "The window faces right onto the sidewalk. I should have seen him walk by if he came this way." But she hadn't seen Jason or anyone else that morning. Morrison made careful notes of the dog's findings. In his experience, when a scent trail ended abruptly like this, it usually meant the person had gotten into a vehicle. But that raised new questions. Had Jason accepted a ride from someone he knew? Had someone forced him into a car? If so, who and why? They expanded the search to include a wider radius around the point where the scent trail ended. More volunteers arrived as word spread through the community. Jason's co-workers from Fazoli's came directly from their shifts. High school classmates who hadn't seen him in months showed up to help. The volunteers were organized into grid patterns, searching every backyard, every shed, every possible hiding place. They looked in storm drains and abandoned buildings. They checked dumpsters and construction sites. The search was thorough and heartbreaking. By late afternoon, dozens of people had combed through miles of neighborhoods. Police had checked hospitals, morgues, and jails throughout the region. Jason's bank account showed no activity. His cell phone continued to go straight to voicemail. As the second day of searching ended with no answers, the community began to grasp the magnitude of what had happened. Someone they knew, someone they had watched grow up, had simply vanished. If it could happen to Jason Jolkowski, a quiet, responsible young man walking a familiar route in broad daylight, it could happen to anyone. The Omaha World Herald ran Jason's story on the front page of the Metro section on June 15th. The headline read, "Teen Vanishes on Way to Work." By afternoon, the story had been picked up by local television stations. Kelly found herself standing in her living room facing news cameras for the first time in her life. The reporter, a young woman not much older than Jason, asked gentle but probing questions. "Mrs. Jolkowski, can you describe Jason for people who might have seen him?" Kelly held Jason's most recent photograph, trying to keep her voice steady. Jason is 19 years old, about 5'8", around 165 pounds. He has brown hair and brown eyes. He was wearing his work uniform, a navy blue polo shirt with the Fazoli's logo and khaki pants. The camera focused on Jason's picture. He looked younger than his 19 years, with a shy smile and kind eyes. It was the kind of face that made people want to help. "What would you like to tell people who might be watching?" Kelly looked directly into the camera. "If you saw Jason that morning, if you saw anything unusual in the area around North 48th Street and Cumming Street, between 11 and 11:30 a.m. on Wednesday. Please call the police. Even if it seems unimportant, it might help us find him." She paused, struggling to maintain composure. "And if someone has Jason, if someone knows where he is, please let him come home. We just want him to come home safely." The news segment aired on all 3 local network affiliates that evening. Within hours, the police tip line was receiving calls. Most were from well-meaning people who thought they might have seen someone matching Jason's description. Others offered theories about what might have happened. Detective Morrison and his team followed up on every credible lead. A woman thought she had seen a young man in a navy shirt getting into a car several blocks from Jason's route. When they investigated, it turned out to be a pizza delivery driver. A man reported seeing someone who looked like Jason at a gas station 20 miles away. The surveillance tape showed it was someone else entirely. Each false lead was both disappointing and necessary. In missing person cases, the breakthrough often came from an unexpected source, someone who had seen something but hadn't initially realized its importance. Kelly sat by the phone that evening, hoping each ring might bring news. Most calls were from friends and family offering support. Some were from strangers who had seen the news coverage and wanted to help. All were kind, but none brought Jason home. As the calls tapered off near midnight, Kelly felt the weight of a new reality settling over her. This was going to be her life now, waiting by the phone, hoping for answers, living in the terrible space between hope and despair. Jim found her still sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., staring at Jason's photograph. "You need to get some sleep," he said gently. Kelly shook her head. "What if someone calls? What if Jason tries to call and we miss it?" Jim sat down beside her and took her hand. "We'll hear the phone. But you can't help Jason by making yourself sick." Kelly knew he was right, but sleep felt like giving up, like accepting that Jason wasn't coming home that night. Still, she let Jim guide her upstairs, where she lay in bed listening to every sound outside, car doors closing, footsteps on sidewalks, anything that might be Jason returning home. 2 weeks passed without a single credible sighting. The initial media attention had generated dozens of tips, but each one led nowhere. Jason's case was entering the phase that police dreaded most, when the obvious explanations had been exhausted and the trail was growing cold. Detective Morrison met with Kelly and Jim on a gray June morning that matched the family's mood. He had been thorough and compassionate throughout the investigation, but Kelly could see the frustration in his eyes. "We've followed up on every tip that's come in," Morrison said. "We've checked surveillance cameras from businesses along Jason's route and found nothing. We've interviewed his coworkers, friends, and acquaintances. No one saw anything suspicious, and no one had any reason to want to harm Jason." Kelly nodded, though each word felt like a small defeat. "What happens now?" Morrison chose his words carefully. "We keep investigating. Jason's case will remain active, and any new information will be pursued immediately. But I have to be honest with you, after this much time with no physical evidence, no witnesses, and no activity on his accounts, the chances of finding him become more difficult." He paused, seeing the pain in Kelly's face. "That doesn't mean we give up. It means we have to be patient and hope that someone, somewhere, knows something and will eventually come forward." Jim asked the question that had been haunting both parents. "Do you think Jason is still alive?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. In my experience, when someone vanishes this completely, without any trace, it usually indicates foul play. But there have been cases where missing persons are found alive years later. We have to hold on to that possibility." After Morrison left, Kelly sat in Jason's room, looking at the evidence of a life interrupted. His bed was still unmade from the last time he had slept in it. His work schedule was pinned to a bulletin board, with Wednesday, June 13th, circled in red ink. His laundry sat clean and folded in a basket, waiting to be put away. Everything in the room spoke of a young man with plans and routines, someone who intended to come back. Jason had been saving money from his Fazoli's job to take more college classes in the fall. He had circled radio broadcasting programs in community college brochures. He had made plans to see a movie with his girlfriend that weekend. Kelly picked up one of Jason's textbooks from a previous semester. Inside the front cover, he had written his name in careful handwriting: Jason A. Jolkowski. The A stood for Anthony, a name chosen to honor his grandfather. Such a simple notation, but it reminded Kelly of all the small details that made up a life, details that seemed increasingly precious as the days passed without answers. The silence in the house was becoming unbearable. Kelly found herself talking to Jason as if he might be able to hear her. "Where are you, honey? What happened to you? Just give us some sign that you're okay." But there was no response, only the echo of her own voice in the empty room. July brought oppressive heat and a sense of stalled momentum. The initial urgency surrounding Jason's disappearance had faded as other news took its place. Police were still investigating, but Kelly could sense their attention shifting to newer cases with fresher leads. The Jolkowski house felt suspended in time. Kelly had taken leave from her job at the beginning of the search, thinking she would need just a few days to help find Jason. Now, weeks later, she couldn't imagine returning to normal routines when her son was still missing. She spent her days reaching out to anyone who might have information. She called psychics who claimed they could help locate missing persons, though none provided anything useful. She researched similar cases online, looking for patterns or clues that might apply to Jason's situation. She contacted missing persons organizations, hoping to learn about new search techniques or resources. Jim tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, returning to work but finding it difficult to concentrate. Co-workers were sympathetic but didn't know what to say. How do you comfort someone whose child has simply vanished? The usual platitudes, "I'm sure he'll turn up," or "Don't worry, these things usually work out," felt empty and inadequate. The most difficult part was the gradual shift in how people reacted to Jason's case. In the first days, everyone had been certain that he would be found quickly. Missing people, especially responsible teenagers from good families, didn't simply disappear forever. There had to be an explanation, a solution just around the corner. But as time passed without answers, Kelly noticed changes in people's behavior. Some friends and neighbors began avoiding her, unsure what to say or afraid that prolonged contact with such profound loss might somehow affect their own families. Others continued to offer support, but with less conviction, their optimism replaced by uncomfortable sympathy. The hardest conversations were with well-meaning people who suggested that Jason might have chosen to disappear. "Maybe he needed some space," they would say. "Maybe he'll come home when he's ready." These comments, though meant to comfort, felt like accusations that Kelly didn't know her own son. At night, Kelly would walk Jason's route to Benson High School, retracing his steps and hoping something might trigger a memory or reveal a clue. The 8-block journey took her past familiar houses, where neighbors had turned on porch lights and drawn curtains against the dark. She would stand at the spot where the tracking dog had lost Jason's scent, trying to imagine what could have happened in those crucial moments. The neighborhood had changed since Jason's disappearance. Parents kept their children closer to home. People were more suspicious of strangers, more aware of their surroundings. The easy trust that had characterized the community was gone, replaced by the understanding that terrible things could happen anywhere, even on sunny morning walks through familiar streets. By September, Jason would have been starting his fall semester at the community college. Kelly found the college brochures he had collected, pages marked and courses circled in his careful handwriting: radio broadcasting, journalism, communications fields that suited his quiet intelligence and careful nature. The police investigation continued, but leads had dwindled to almost nothing. Detective Morrison still returned Kelly's calls promptly and updated her on any developments, but there was little to report. Jason's case had been entered into national databases, and his information was shared with law enforcement agencies across the country. But without new evidence or witnesses, the investigation had reached a standstill. Kelly began to realize that waiting for someone else to find Jason wasn't enough. She started researching everything she could about missing persons cases, learning about search techniques, legal procedures, and victim advocacy. What she discovered was disturbing. Thousands of people disappeared each year, and many cases received minimal attention or resources. She contacted other families who had missing loved ones, connecting through online forums and support groups. The conversations were both heartbreaking and illuminating. Parents, siblings, and children shared stories of bureaucratic obstacles, insufficient police resources, and public indifference. Many had been searching for their missing family members for years or decades. One conversation particularly affected Kelly. She spoke with a mother in California whose daughter had been missing for 5 years. "You have to become the expert on your own case," the woman told her. "The police do what they can, but you're the one who will never give up. You're the one who will keep asking questions long after everyone else has moved on." That night, Kelly sat at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and began making lists. She wrote down the names of everyone who had been contacted about Jason's case. She made timelines of his last known activities. She researched missing persons laws and victim rights organizations. For the first time since Jason had disappeared, Kelly felt a sense of purpose beyond simply waiting and hoping. She couldn't bring Jason home through wishful thinking, but she could ensure that his case remained active and visible. She could learn to navigate the systems that were supposed to help families like hers. Jim found her still working at 2 a.m., surrounded by papers and notes. "Kelly, you need to get some sleep." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with determination despite the exhaustion. "I can't just wait anymore. I have to do something." Over the following days, Kelly began making calls to organizations that specialized in missing persons cases. She learned about the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, though Jason was too old for their services. She discovered the DOE Network, a volunteer organization that worked to match missing persons with unidentified remains. Each call taught her something new about the landscape of missing persons investigations. She learned about jurisdictional issues, about the challenges of coordinating between different law enforcement agencies, about the importance of media attention in keeping cases active. October brought Jason's 20th birthday, a milestone that felt both significant and meaningless. Kelly had always made birthdays special in their family, with homemade cakes and carefully chosen gifts. This year, she stood in the kitchen early that morning, unsure how to mark the day. She ended up baking Jason's favorite chocolate cake anyway, as if the familiar ritual might somehow call him home. Jim found her sitting at the kitchen table with a cake in front of her, 2 candles representing the decades Jason had been alive, neither of them lit. "Should we?" Jim began, then stopped. "How do you celebrate a birthday when the person isn't there to celebrate?" They decided to have a quiet dinner together, setting Jason's place at the table as they had done every night since he disappeared. It was both comforting and painful to maintain these routines, but Kelly couldn't bear the thought of acknowledging his absence by removing his chair. That evening, several of Jason's friends stopped by. They were young adults now, some finishing college, others starting careers. They brought small gifts, a book about radio broadcasting, a CD of music Jason had liked, a photo from their high school graduation. They shared memories of Jason's gentle humor and dependability. "He was the one person you could count on," said Mark, who had known Jason since middle school. "If Jason said he would do something, he did it, always. He never talked badly about anyone," added Sarah, Jason's girlfriend. "Even when people were jerks to him, he just stayed quiet and moved on. He was too kind for his own good sometimes." Kelly listened to these descriptions of her son, recognizing the young man she had raised, but hearing him through the eyes of his peers. They remembered his loyalty, his reliability, his quiet strength. But they also shared stories she hadn't known, times Jason had helped friends with problems, moments when his steadiness had been exactly what someone needed. After his friends left, Kelly found herself looking through Jason's belongings again. His room had become a kind of shrine, preserved exactly as he had left it. She found a journal tucked under his mattress, something she hadn't discovered in previous searches through his things. The journal entries were sporadic and brief. Jason wrote about work, about classes, about his uncertainty regarding his future. Some entries revealed a young man struggling with typical concerns about direction and purpose. "I don't know what I really want to do with my life. Everyone seems to have it figured out, except me. Maybe that's normal. Maybe everyone feels lost sometimes and just doesn't talk about it. Another entry, dated just 2 weeks before he disappeared. Mom worries about me too much. I can see it in her face when she thinks I'm not looking. I wish I could tell her that I'm okay, that I'm just trying to figure things out like everyone else. Sometimes I think about just taking off somewhere and starting over. But I would never do that to my family. They deserve better than that. Reading these private thoughts, Kelly felt both comfort and anguish. The journal confirmed what she had always known, that Jason would never have chosen to disappear and cause his family such pain. But it also revealed the typical struggles of a young adult that they hadn't fully discussed. By December 2001, Kelly had transformed her kitchen table into a command center. Folders filled with police reports, newspaper clippings, and correspondence with other missing persons families covered every surface. She had contacted legislators about missing persons laws, reached out to media outlets about keeping Jason's case in the public eye, and begun developing what would eventually become Project Jason. The idea had started with a simple observation. Families of missing persons had no central resource, no guide to help them navigate the complex systems of law enforcement, media, and legal procedures. When someone disappeared, their loved ones were left to figure out the process on their own, often making crucial mistakes in the first hours and days, when time was most critical. Kelly began creating the resource she wished had existed when Jason first disappeared. She compiled contact information for law enforcement agencies, journalists, and volunteer search organizations. She researched missing persons laws and created simple guides explaining how families could ensure their cases received proper attention. Her first official contact came from a woman in Texas whose 18-year-old son had disappeared 6 months earlier. The woman had found Kelly's name through an online missing persons forum and called, desperately seeking advice. The police say they're doing everything they can, but I don't know what questions to ask or what resources might be available, the woman said. I feel like I'm failing my son because I don't know how to help him. Kelly spent 2 hours on the phone, sharing everything she had learned about missing persons investigations. She explained how to work effectively with law enforcement, how to generate media attention, and how to coordinate volunteer search efforts. Most importantly, she assured the woman that feeling lost and overwhelmed was normal, that no parent was prepared for this situation. After that call, Kelly knew she had found her mission. If she couldn't bring Jason home, she could at least help other families navigate the nightmare of having a missing loved one. She could turn her painful education into something that might prevent other families from making the mistakes that wasted precious time. On December 31, 2001, Kelly officially incorporated Project Jason as a nonprofit organization. The mission statement was simple: to provide resources and support to families of missing persons, and to raise awareness about the issues surrounding missing adults. The name honored Jason while acknowledging that his case was part of a much larger problem. Every day, adults disappeared under circumstances that defied explanation. Their families deserved support, resources, and advocates who understood their situation. Jim was initially concerned that focusing on other families might prevent Kelly from accepting what had happened to Jason. "Are you sure this is healthy?" he asked. "Maybe you need to focus on grieving instead of trying to fix everything." Kelly considered his words carefully. "This is how I grieve," she said finally. "I can't bring Jason back, but I can try to make sure other families don't go through this alone. It's the only way I can find any meaning in what happened to us." The first major test of Project Jason came in early 2002, when Kelly received a call from a frantic mother in Colorado. Her 25-year-old daughter had failed to show up for work 3 days earlier and hadn't been seen since. The local police had taken a report but seemed to consider the case a low priority. Kelly spent the next week walking the family through every step of the missing persons process. She helped them organize search teams, contact media outlets, and follow up with law enforcement. Most importantly, she provided emotional support from someone who truly understood what they were experiencing. The Colorado case had a positive outcome. The missing woman was found alive after a week, suffering from a head injury that had caused temporary amnesia. But the experience taught Kelly valuable lessons about how Project Jason could be most effective. She realized that families needed immediate support in the first hours after someone disappeared. The decisions made in those crucial early moments often determined whether a case received proper attention from law enforcement and media. Project Jason needed to provide rapid response resources that families could access immediately. Kelly began developing a comprehensive checklist for families of missing persons. The list included immediate steps like contacting all local hospitals and jails, securing the missing person's cell phone and bank records, and creating a detailed timeline of their last known activities. It also included longer-term strategies for maintaining media attention and working with law enforcement agencies. As Project Jason grew, Kelly found herself speaking at conferences and workshops across the country. She testified before state legislatures about the need for better missing persons laws. She appeared on national television programs, always bringing Jason's photograph and telling his story while advocating for other families. The work was emotionally exhausting, but also healing in unexpected ways. Every family Kelly helped represented hope that someone, somewhere, might also be helping Jason. Every successful case gave her evidence that missing persons could be found, that families shouldn't give up hope. But the work also brought constant reminders of the dangers her son might have faced. Kelly learned about human trafficking, about predators who targeted vulnerable young people, about the various ways people could disappear. Each new case educated her about possibilities she preferred not to consider regarding Jason's fate. During quiet moments, Kelly would look at Jason's photograph on her desk and whisper updates about the families Project Jason was helping. "We found someone's daughter in California last week," she might say. "A runaway teenager, but she's home safe now." It felt important to keep Jason informed about the work being done in his name, even if she couldn't be certain he could hear her. The most difficult aspect of the work was the cases that never found resolution. For every missing person who was found, there were others who remained lost. Kelly maintained contact with hundreds of families who, like her own, continued searching year after year without answers. By 2003, Project Jason had helped more than 50 families navigate missing persons cases. Kelly had testified before the Nebraska legislature about the need for improved missing persons reporting procedures, and she was working with lawmakers in other states on similar initiatives. The work had given Kelly a platform to tell Jason's story to new audiences, but it had also taught her difficult truths about the limitations of the missing persons system. Adult missing persons cases often received minimal resources, especially when the missing person had no history of mental illness or substance abuse and showed no obvious signs of foul play. Kelly learned that many law enforcement agencies were understaffed and overwhelmed. Officers genuinely wanted to help, but they were limited by time, resources, and competing priorities. Missing adults cases that lacked physical evidence or clear leads often moved to the back burner while officers focused on cases with better chances of resolution. She also discovered significant gaps in missing persons laws. In many states, there was no requirement for law enforcement to take a missing person report immediately. Some agencies insisted on waiting 24 or 48 hours before accepting reports, despite the fact that the first hours were often most crucial for finding missing persons. Even more problematic was the lack of coordination between jurisdictions. A person who disappeared in one state but was found in another might not be properly identified because information wasn't shared effectively between agencies. National databases existed, but they weren't always used consistently. Kelly's legislative advocacy began to pay off. When Nebraska passed new missing persons legislation in 2004, the law, informally known as Jason's Law, required law enforcement agencies to accept missing person reports immediately and to enter the information into state and national databases within 2 hours. The law also established protocols for sharing information between agencies and required annual training for officers on missing persons procedures. Most significantly, it recognized that the first hours after someone disappeared were critical, and that delays in reporting could be life-threatening. Kelly was invited to the bill's signing ceremony at the state capitol. As she watched the governor sign the legislation, she felt a complex mixture of pride and sadness. This was a meaningful victory that would help other families, but it couldn't help Jason. Her son had been missing for nearly 3 years, and she was no closer to finding him than she had been in those first desperate days. Still, she recognized that Jason's disappearance had created something positive. His name was now attached to legislation that might prevent other families from experiencing the bureaucratic delays and jurisdictional confusion that had complicated his case. After the ceremony, Kelly visited Jason's grave marker in the cemetery, where the family had placed a memorial stone. She had inscribed it with the words, "Missing but not forgotten, June 13, 2001. She told him about the new law and about the families. Project Jason continued to help. "I hope you're proud of what we're doing in your name," she said. "I hope somehow it makes a difference." The 5th anniversary of Jason's disappearance brought renewed media attention, but no new leads. By June 2006, Jason's case had become one of the most well-known missing persons cases in Nebraska, but it remained completely unsolved. Detective Morrison, who had been promoted to sergeant, still checked in with Kelly regularly. He had never given up on Jason's case, but he was honest about the limitations they faced. "After this much time, we need either physical evidence or for someone who knows something to come forward," he told Kelly during one of their regular meetings. "I still believe someone out there has information about what happened to Jason. It's just a matter of whether they'll ever decide to share it." Kelly had heard this before, but it was still difficult to accept. She had trouble understanding how someone could have information about Jason's disappearance and choose to remain silent. How could someone know what had happened to her son and allow her family to continue living with uncertainty? Project Jason had grown significantly by 2006, helping hundreds of families and advocating for missing persons legislation in multiple states. Kelly had become a recognized expert on missing persons issues, speaking at national conferences and consulting with law enforcement agencies about best practices. The success of Project Jason had also brought Jason's story to new audiences. His case was featured in national magazines, television documentaries, and online missing persons databases. His photograph and details were shared thousands of times across social media platforms and missing persons website. Each new platform brought hope that someone, somewhere, might recognize Jason or remember seeing something relevant to his disappearance. Kelly received occasional tips and potential sightings, but none had led to meaningful developments. One particularly difficult aspect of the ongoing publicity was the well-meaning but painful suggestions from people who didn't understand the case. Kelly regularly heard theories about what might have happened to Jason, most based on misunderstandings about the circumstances of his disappearance. Some people suggested he had run away to start a new life, despite the mountain of evidence showing he had no intention of leaving his family. Others proposed elaborate scenarios involving witness protection programs or secret government operations, theories that ignored the simple fact that Jason had been walking to meet a coworker for a ride to his part-time job. Kelly learned to respond to these suggestions patiently, understanding that people needed to believe there were logical explanations for inexplicable events. The alternative, accepting that terrible things could happen randomly to innocent people, was too frightening for many people to consider. The most hurtful comments came from those who implied that Kelly should move on or accept reality. These critics seemed to believe that continuing to search for Jason or maintaining hope that he might be found represented an unhealthy refusal to face facts. Kelly struggled with these criticisms, sometimes wondering if her dedication to finding Jason and helping other families was preventing her from processing her grief normally. But she had learned that there was no normal way to respond to having a child disappear. Every family found their own path through the nightmare, and hers involved action rather than passive acceptance. By 2010, Project Jason had become a nationally recognized organization, helping more than 1,000 families navigate missing persons cases and advocating for legislative improvements in dozens of states. Kelly had testified before Congress about the need for better federal coordination of missing persons cases, and she regularly consulted with law enforcement agencies about missing persons protocols. The success of Project Jason had given Jason's case unprecedented visibility. His story had been featured on national television shows, in documentary films, and across numerous online platforms. Despite this exposure, Jason remained missing, and no significant new leads had emerged in years. Kelly had reached a difficult acceptance that Jason might never be found. The statistics for long-term missing persons cases were sobering. The likelihood of finding missing adults decreased dramatically after the first year, and very few missing persons were found alive after 5 or more years. Still, she couldn't give up completely. Part of her work with Project Jason involved helping other families understand that hope and acceptance weren't mutually exclusive. You could accept that your loved one might never come home, while still maintaining hope that they would. You could grieve for the person you had lost, while continuing to search for them. This balance between hope and acceptance became central to Kelly's message when speaking with other families. She encouraged them to take care of themselves emotionally and physically while continuing their search efforts. She warned against the dangers of making missing person searches their entire identity, something she had been guilty of in Jason's early years. Kelly had learned to pace herself, to take breaks from the constant advocacy work, and to find joy in other aspects of life. She and Jim had worked hard to rebuild their relationship, which had been strained by the trauma of losing Jason and the demands of running Project Jason. They had learned to talk about Jason in present tense sometimes and past tense at others, acknowledging the uncertainty of his status. They had developed new traditions and routines that honored Jason's memory while allowing them to continue living. One significant development in 2010 was the creation of the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NAMIS, a federal database designed to help solve missing persons and unidentified remains cases. Kelly had advocated for such a system for years, testifying before Congress about the need for better information sharing between agencies. When NAMIS launched, Jason's case was among the first entries. The database allowed law enforcement agencies, medical examiners, and families to share information about missing persons and unidentified remains in ways that had never been possible before. Kelly was cautiously optimistic about NAMIS, though she understood that technology couldn't solve cases that lacked physical evidence. Still, the database represented the kind of systematic improvement she had been advocating for since Jason's disappearance. On June 13, 2010, the 9th anniversary of Jason's disappearance, Kelly organized a vigil at Benson High School. More than 200 people attended, including families of other missing persons, law enforcement officers, and community members who remembered Jason. The 10th anniversary of Jason's disappearance in 2011 brought significant media attention and a renewed police review of his case. Sergeant Morrison, now nearing retirement, worked with younger detectives to examine every piece of evidence and interview notes from the original investigation. The review incorporated new forensic techniques and technologies that hadn't been available in 2001. DNA testing capabilities had improved dramatically, and digital forensics could potentially reveal information from electronic devices that might have been missed in the original investigation. Unfortunately, Jason's case had very little physical evidence to re-examine. The complete absence of clues that had made the case so baffling in 2001 continued to frustrate investigators a decade later. There were no personal items found along his route, no witnesses who had seen him after he left home, no surveillance footage from nearby businesses. The lack of evidence had led to various theories about what might have happened to Jason. Some investigators believed he had been the victim of an opportunistic crime, someone who happened to be in the area and saw an opportunity. Others thought his disappearance was more planned, possibly by someone who knew his routine. Kelly had heard all the theories over the years, but none of them brought Jason home or provided closure for her family. The speculation was sometimes helpful for investigators, but it could be torturous for family members who found themselves imagining endless scenarios about their loved one's fate. The 10th anniversary vigil was held at the spot where the tracking dog had lost Jason's scent. Kelly spoke to the crowd about the importance of not giving up on missing persons cases, even when years passed without resolution. Jason may have been gone for 10 years, but he is not forgotten, she said. Every day that passes without answers is another day that someone, somewhere, carries a secret about what happened to him. I still believe that person will find the courage to speak up. The vigil was covered by local and national media outlets, bringing Jason's story to new audiences who might have information about his disappearance. Kelly always felt a mixture of hope and exhaustion during these anniversary events. They served important purposes in keeping Jason's case active and visible, but they also reminded her of how much time had passed without answers. After the vigil, Kelly and Jim visited the cemetery memorial they had placed for Jason. The stone was weathered now, the inscription still clear but softened by a decade of Nebraska weather. They stood quietly together, each lost in their own thoughts about their missing son. Kelly wondered what Jason would look like now as a 29-year-old man. Would he have finished college? Would he be married? Maybe giving them grandchildren? Would he have found his calling in radio broadcasting or discovered some other passion? These questions were both precious and painful. Imagining Jason's alternate life kept him alive in their minds. But it also emphasized everything they had lost when he disappeared. By 2015, Project Jason had helped more than 2,000 families, and Kelly had become one of the most recognized advocates for missing persons issues in the United States. She had testified before Congress multiple times, consulted with federal agencies about missing persons protocols, and worked with legislators in more than 30 states to improve missing persons laws. The work had taken Kelly to places she never could have imagined when she was an Omaha mother whose biggest concern was whether her teenage son was doing his homework. She had spoken at international conferences about missing persons issues, worked with families from all economic and social backgrounds, and learned about the global scope of the missing persons problem. Each case taught her something new, but they all shared common elements: the devastating impact on families, the limitations of existing systems, and the importance of advocacy in keeping cases active. Kelly had developed a deep understanding of the emotional journey families experienced, from the initial shock and panic through the various stages of grief, hope, and eventual acceptance. She had also learned about the ripple effects of missing persons cases on communities. When someone disappeared without explanation, it shattered the sense of safety and predictability that communities relied on. Neighbors became more suspicious, parents more protective, everyone a little more aware that terrible things could happen to anyone. Jason's case had become a touchstone for discussions about missing persons issues. His story was regularly cited in academic papers about missing persons investigations, used as a case study in law enforcement training programs, and referenced in legislative hearings about missing persons laws. Kelly felt proud that Jason's disappearance had led to meaningful changes in how missing persons cases were handled. But she also felt the weight of being the public face of a tragedy she wouldn't wish on anyone. Sometimes she wondered what her life would have been like if Jason had simply made it to Benson High School that morning in 2001. During quiet moments, Kelly allowed herself to imagine alternative timelines. In one, Jason arrived safely at the school, got his ride to work, and came home that evening to complain about his shift like any other day. In another, he decided to walk directly to work instead of meeting his coworker, avoiding whatever danger had awaited him on his planned route. These mental exercises were both comforting and dangerous. They reminded Kelly of how random and senseless Jason's disappearance had been. But they also kept her connected to a version of reality where her son was still alive and safe. Kelly had learned to limit these imaginary excursions, understanding that spending too much time in alternate realities could prevent her from functioning in the actual world. But she also recognized them as a normal part of grief, a way of processing the incomprehensible loss of a child. The most difficult aspect of her advocacy work was meeting families who were just beginning their journey with a missing loved one. Kelly could see her younger self in their faces, the desperate hope, the certainty that their case would be different, the belief that love and determination alone could bring their person home. The approach of the 15th anniversary in 2016 brought both reflection and renewed determination. Kelly had been working with missing persons families for nearly as long as Jason had been alive when he disappeared. The teenager who had walked out of their house in 2001 would have been 34 years old by now. Kelly had aged visibly during these years of advocacy. The stress of losing Jason and the demands of running Project Jason had taken a physical toll. Her hair was gray now, and lines of worry had settled permanently around her eyes. But there was also a strength in her bearing that hadn't been there before, a confidence born from years of fighting for other people's children. Jim had aged too, though more quietly. He had never been as comfortable with public speaking as Kelly, preferring to support her work behind the scenes. He managed Project Jason's finances, maintained their website, and handled the technical aspects of the organization, while Kelly focused on direct family services and advocacy. Their marriage had survived the trauma of losing Jason, but it had been transformed by it. They had learned to communicate about grief in ways they never had to before Jason's disappearance. They had developed new ways of supporting each other through the particularly difficult days, anniversaries, birthdays, holidays, or times when a new case reminded them too vividly of their own loss. The 15th anniversary vigil drew the largest crowd yet, with more than 400 people gathering at Benson High School. The crowd included families of other missing persons, law enforcement officers, community members, and people who had followed Jason's case through media coverage over the years. Kelly spoke about the progress that had been made in missing persons investigations since 2001. Technological advances had made it easier to share information between agencies. New laws required faster reporting and better coordination. Database systems like NamUs had created unprecedented opportunities for matching missing persons with unidentified remains. Jason's case has never been solved, but his disappearance has led to changes that have helped solve other cases, Kelly told the crowd. If Jason could know that his story has helped bring other people home to their families, I think he would be proud of that legacy. After her speech, Kelly was approached by a young woman who looked to be about Jason's age when he disappeared. The woman had been following Jason's case for years and wanted to thank Kelly for her advocacy work. "I have a brother who's mentally ill and has gone missing several times," the woman explained. "Each time, we've been able to use resources that Project Jason helped create. We've always been able to find him and get him the help he needs. Your work has saved my family from going through what you've experienced." These conversations were both rewarding and heartbreaking for Kelly. Each person who had been helped by Project Jason represented a family that hadn't had to endure the prolonged uncertainty that she and Jim lived with every day. But they also reminded her that Jason was still missing, that all her work hadn't been able to bring her own son home. In 2018, Kelly received a phone call that initially filled her with hope, but ultimately led to another disappointment. A construction crew working on a development project in Council Bluffs, Iowa, had discovered human remains in a wooded area near the Missouri River. The location was about 20 miles from where Jason had disappeared, and the remains were believed to be those of a young adult male who had been deceased for several years. Local authorities contacted Kelly because of the potential connection to Jason's case. Kelly and Jim drove to Iowa to meet with investigators and provide DNA samples for comparison with the remains. The process was both routine and surreal. After 17 years of wondering about Jason's fate, they might finally have answers. The wait for DNA results took 3 weeks, during which Kelly found it difficult to concentrate on her usual Project Jason activities. She had imagined this moment countless times over the years, but the reality was more complicated than she had expected. Part of her hoped the remains would be Jason's, because it would finally provide the answers their family had been seeking for nearly 2 decades. But another part of her recoiled from the idea that Jason had been dead all along, that all her years of hoping he might still be alive had been futile. When the DNA results came back, they were negative. The remains belonged to someone else, another person who had died far from home. Another family that would hopefully receive the closure that continued to elude the Jolkowskis. Kelly felt simultaneously relieved and disappointed by the results. The fact that the remains weren't Jason's meant he might still be alive somewhere, but it also meant her family was no closer to answers than they had been before. This experience taught Kelly something new about the complexity of hope in missing persons cases. She had thought she wanted definitive answers about Jason's fate, but the possibility of receiving those answers had forced her to confront how much of her identity had become built around the uncertainty of not knowing. If Jason were definitively dead, Would she continue her advocacy work with the same passion? If he were found alive, would she be able to return to a normal life after nearly 2 decades of searching? These questions didn't have easy answers. Kelly realized that she had learned to live with uncertainty in ways that would be difficult to change, regardless of what happened to Jason's case. The not knowing had become a fundamental part of who she was, shaping her worldview and her relationships in ways that couldn't be easily undone. The Iowa incident also reminded Kelly of how many other families were dealing with unidentified remains and unsolved missing persons cases. The remains that weren't Jason belonged to someone else's son, someone else's missing piece of their family puzzle. This realization reinforced Kelly's commitment to her advocacy work. Regardless of what ultimately happened to Jason's case, every unidentified remain represented a family somewhere who deserved answers, just as every missing person represented loved ones who deserved to know what had happened. By 2020, the world had changed dramatically from the place it had been when Jason disappeared. Social media had revolutionized how information about missing persons was shared. Smartphones and GPS technology had made it much more difficult for people to vanish without a trace. Security cameras were ubiquitous in ways that had been unimaginable in 2001. Kelly often wondered how different Jason's case might have been if he had disappeared in 2020 instead of 2001. His cell phone would have provided location data. Security cameras might have captured his movements. Social media would have allowed his story to spread instantly to thousands of people. But these technological advances also highlighted how unusual Jason's case had been from the beginning. Even in 2001, it was extraordinary for someone to disappear so completely in broad daylight from a familiar neighborhood. The absence of witnesses, evidence, or clues had made his case remarkable among missing persons investigators. The COVID-19 pandemic had forced Project Jason to adapt its services to virtual platforms. Kelly found herself conducting video calls with families instead of meeting them in person, organizing online vigils instead of physical gatherings, and advocating for policy changes through virtual legislative hearings. The pandemic had also created new categories of missing persons cases. Families were separated by travel restrictions and quarantine requirements. Some people had gone missing during the chaos of early lockdown periods. Others had used the disruption of normal routines to disappear intentionally. Kelly marked Jason's 19th anniversary in 2020 with a virtual vigil that drew participants from around the world. The online format allowed people who had never been able to attend previous vigils to participate, including families from other countries who had been helped by Project Jason's resources. During the virtual vigil, Kelly reflected on how the pandemic had reminded everyone of life's fragility and uncertainty. We've all learned this year that normal routines can be disrupted without warning, she said. Families can be separated by circumstances beyond their control. But we've also learned that love and connection can transcend physical distance. The pandemic year had been particularly difficult for Kelly personally. The isolation and uncertainty affected everyone. But for someone who had already been living with profound uncertainty for 19 years, the additional stress was overwhelming at times. Kelly found herself struggling with depression and anxiety in ways she hadn't since the early years after Jason's disappearance. The coping mechanisms she had developed, staying busy with advocacy work, traveling to speak at conferences, meeting face-to-face with families, were all disrupted by pandemic restrictions. She began working with a therapist for the first time, something she probably should have done years earlier. The therapy sessions helped her understand how much of her identity had become wrapped up in being Jason's mother and the founder of Project Jason. She had lost touch with other aspects of herself during the years of intense advocacy work. The therapy also helped Kelly process the complicated grief of losing someone who might still be alive. Traditional grief counseling was designed for people who had lost loved ones to death, with defined stages and expected outcome. But the grief of ambiguous loss, when you don't know if your loved one is alive or dead, followed different patterns and required different approaches. The 20th anniversary in 2021 felt like a significant milestone, though Kelly wasn't sure why. 20 years was a round number, but it didn't bring Jason home or provide any new insights into his disappearance. If anything, the passage of 2 decades made it seem less likely that the case would ever be solved. Kelly had read enough about long-term missing persons cases to understand the statistics. Very few missing adults were found alive after 20 years, and even fewer missing persons cases were solved after such a long period without new evidence. But statistics hadn't stopped her from hoping for 19 years, and they wouldn't stop her now. The 2021 anniversary vigil was held in person again, with appropriate COVID-19 precautions. The crowd was smaller than in previous years, but the commitment of those who attended felt stronger. These were people who had been following Jason's case for years or even decades, who understood that showing up was an act of faith rather than optimism. Kelly's speech at the vigil focused on the importance of persistence in missing persons cases. 20 years seems like a long time, but I've worked with families who have been searching for 30, 40, even 50 years, she said. Some of them have eventually found answers. Others are still searching. But none of them have given up, and neither will we. After the vigil, a reporter asked Kelly if she still believed Jason was alive. It was a question she had been asked hundreds of times over the years, and her answer had evolved as she had learned to live with uncertainty. "I don't know if Jason is alive," she said. "I hope he is, but I've learned to separate hope from expectation. I hope Jason is alive and safe somewhere, but I also accept that he might not be. What I know for certain is that he deserves to be found, regardless of whether he's found alive or not." This nuanced view of hope had taken Kelly years to develop. In the early years after Jason's disappearance, she had clung to hope as if it were a life preserver, believing that losing hope would somehow betray Jason or make his return less likely. But she had learned that hope could be more flexible and sustainable when it wasn't attached to specific outcomes. Kelly had also learned to find meaning in Jason's legacy, even if he was never found. Project Jason had helped thousands of families navigate missing persons cases. Legislative changes inspired by Jason's case had improved missing persons investigations across the country. His story had raised awareness about missing persons issues in ways that might prevent other families from experiencing similar losses. These accomplishments didn't replace Jason or eliminate the pain of losing him, but they provided a sense of purpose that helped Kelly continue moving forward. Jason's life had meaning beyond its tragic ending, and his disappearance had created positive changes that honored his memory. The most difficult aspect of the 20th anniversary was accepting how much time had passed. Jason had been 19 when he disappeared, and Kelly was now older than he had ever been. She had spent more years searching for him than he had been alive. In 2022, Kelly made the difficult decision to step back from her day-to-day leadership of Project Jason. She remained chairman of the board and continued to be involved in major policy initiatives, but she transferred operational responsibilities to a team of professional staff members who had been working with the organization for years. The decision wasn't driven by discouragement about Jason's case, but rather by recognition that she needed to focus on her own well-being and her relationship with Jim. They were both in their 60s now, and Kelly wanted to ensure they had time together that wasn't entirely consumed by missing persons work. Kelly also wanted to explore aspects of herself that had been dormant since 2001. She had been interested in art before Jason's disappearance, and she began taking painting classes. She had always enjoyed gardening, and she expanded their backyard garden into an elaborate landscape that required daily attention. These activities felt almost selfish at first. How could she spend time painting or gardening when Jason was still missing? But Kelly's therapist helped her understand that maintaining her own mental and physical health was essential for sustaining her long-term advocacy work. Kelly's decision to step back from Project Jason's leadership also reflected her confidence in the organization she had built. The professional staff members were skilled advocates who understood both the emotional and practical aspects of missing persons cases. The organization's resources and protocols had been tested and refined through thousands of cases. Project Jason would continue its mission with or without Kelly's direct involvement, which had always been one of her goals. She had never wanted the organization to be dependent on her personal story or her individual efforts. Missing persons advocacy needed to be sustainable beyond any single case or family. Kelly continued to speak at conferences and events, but she became more selective about her commitments. She focused on opportunities that could create the most significant impact, particularly legislative initiatives and training programs for law enforcement agencies. One project that particularly engaged Kelly was working with university researchers to study long-term missing persons cases. She provided access to Project Jason's database of cases to help researchers identify patterns and develop new investigative techniques. The research revealed interesting insights about missing persons cases that remained unsolved for more than 10 years. Most of these cases involved adults who had disappeared without obvious signs of foul play, similar to Jason's case. The absence of physical evidence made them particularly difficult to solve, but some had eventually been resolved through advances in technology or by witnesses who came forward years later. Kelly found the research both encouraging and sobering. It suggested that Jason's case might still be solvable, but it also confirmed that cases like his were among the most challenging for investigators. The complete absence of evidence wasn't unusual in long-term unsolved cases, but it also meant that resolution often required luck as much as skill. Despite stepping back from Project Jason's daily operations, Kelly continued to maintain Jason's case files and follow up on any potential leads. She updated his information in missing persons databases annually and responded to occasional tips from people who thought they might have seen him. As 2025 began, Kelly found herself in a reflective mood. Jason had been missing for nearly 24 years, longer than he had been alive. She was now a grandmother to the children of friends and neighbors, experiencing the joy of watching young people grow up, while always wondering what Jason's children might have been like. Kelly continued to receive calls from families of missing persons, though less frequently than in previous years. Each call reminded her of her own early desperation and the importance of having someone who understood the experience. She tried to provide the same combination of practical advice and emotional support that had been so crucial in her own journey. The landscape of missing persons investigations had changed dramatically since 2001. DNA technology could now identify remains from much smaller samples. Facial recognition software could help match missing persons to surveillance footage. Social media and crowdsourcing had created new ways to share information about missing persons cases. Kelly wondered again how these advances might have affected Jason's case if they had been available in 2001. But she also recognized that speculation about alternative outcomes was less helpful than focusing on the present reality. Jason's case remained active in national databases and was occasionally featured in true crime podcasts or television shows. Each new exposure brought the possibility that someone with information might finally come forward, but it also brought the painful reminder that 24 years of publicity hadn't yet produced a resolution. Kelly had learned to manage her expectations about media coverage. Early in Jason's case, she had believed that reaching the right audience would certainly produce the breakthrough they needed. But she had discovered that awareness alone wasn't always enough to solve missing persons cases. Still, she continued to participate in interviews and documentaries about Jason's case. His story had become an important example of how missing persons investigations had evolved and how families could advocate for their loved ones. Even without resolution, Jason's case had educational value for other families and investigators. The most difficult interviews were those that asked Kelly to reflect on how Jason's disappearance had changed her life. The question implied that she had chosen this path, when the reality was that circumstances had chosen it for her. She had simply responded to an unimaginable situation in the only way that felt meaningful. Kelly often thought about the parallel life she might have lived if Jason had made it to Benson High School that morning. She would probably still be working at her original job, worrying about ordinary problems like mortgage payments and retirement planning. She and Jim would be anticipating visits from their adult son and possibly grandchildren. But Kelly also recognized that the work she had done through Project Jason had given her life a purpose and meaning that might not have existed in that alternate timeline. She had helped thousands of families navigate the worst experiences of their lives. She had influenced legislation that made missing persons investigations more effective. She had raised awareness about issues that affected tens of thousands of families every year. These accomplishments couldn't replace Jason or eliminate the pain of losing him, but they provided evidence that his life and his disappearance had mattered in ways that extended far beyond his immediate family. Today, as Kelly updates Jason's profile in the NamUs database one more time, she reflects on the journey that began with a simple walk to meet a coworker. The photograph she uploads is the same one that has appeared on missing persons flyers for nearly a quarter century. Jason, smiling shyly at the camera, looking younger than his 19 years, representing both hope and heartbreak for everyone who sees it. The case details remain unchanged. Jason Anthony Jolkowski, missing since June 13, 2001. Last seen leaving his family home at 2648 North 48th Street in Omaha, Nebraska. The circumstances of his disappearance are as mysterious today as they were 24 years ago. But the impact of Jason's case extends far beyond the unanswered questions about his fate. Project Jason has now assisted more than 5,000 families navigating missing persons cases. The organization's resources are used by law enforcement agencies, victim advocates, and families across the United States and internationally. Legislative changes influenced by Jason's case have improved missing persons investigations in most U.S. states. Faster reporting requirements, better information sharing between agencies, and enhanced database systems have helped solve cases that might otherwise have remained cold. Kelly continues to receive thank you notes from families who have been reunited with missing loved ones, often with help from resources developed through Project Jason. Each reunion represents the outcome she continues to hope for in Jason's case, even after nearly a quarter century of searching. The question that opened this story, how does someone vanish completely in the middle of a sunny morning in their own neighborhood, remains unanswered. But Jason's disappearance has generated other questions that have been answered. How can families navigate missing persons investigations more effectively? How can laws be improved to better serve missing persons cases? How can communities support families facing the unimaginable loss of a missing loved one? Kelly places Jason's photograph on the table beside a candle, as she has done every evening for nearly 24 years. The light flickers in the slight breeze from an open window, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The flame represents hope that persists despite uncertainty, love that endures despite loss, and the belief that some questions will eventually find their answers. Jason's story is not only about a missing young man, it is about a family who refused to let him disappear without meaning. Grief transformed into advocacy, fear into determination, and loss into a legacy of hope for countless others. It is proof that even the deepest mysteries can generate light, and that love can create purpose even in the face of inexplicable loss. In homes across the country, other families sit beside photographs of their own missing loved ones, drawing strength from Jason's example and Kelly's advocacy. They understand that while they cannot control whether their loved ones come home, they can control how they respond to the wait. They can choose hope over despair, action over helplessness, community over isolation. The candle beside Jason's photograph burns steady and bright, a small flame that has somehow endured through nearly 24 years of uncertainty. It represents the enduring power of love to create meaning from tragedy, purpose from pain, and hope from the darkest of mysteries.